Thank you all for coming. We are honored to have his honored Senator Gordon to join us for a time being. I think the topic is important given the timing. North Africa has become a very major issue, I think, for US policy. I think it's going to increase. It is a region of the world that you have to take as a whole rather than by country, and especially you have to also include the Sahel countries, so from Sudan all the way to Mali. It's our one region. It is, as you all know, a very fragile region, a region that's being used currently by all kinds of powers, especially the Russians, to enter into Africa, threatening a lot of things. In the last few months, Russia has also announced plans and started on building military bases in a place across Libya, which is quite a major development, considering that Libya is only an hour away from NATO bases in Southern Europe. This is the first time we have that. From Libya also, Russia has expanded into 10 African countries. The United States government has launched a new strategy for fragile states. Most of them, I think all of them, are in Africa from Libya down. I think the only country exception to that is Haiti. This is a region that I think is quite a big mess and can turn into a bigger one very soon. I mean, we're seeing what's happening in Sudan, Libya, Chad, Niger, Mali, the Central African Republic. It's really a whole region. So the hope is we're going to talk about some of these elements, but we're going to start with the senator who has to leave after his part of this program. So let me give you a sense of the program we're going with. Senator Cardin will speak first, and then we'll take a few questions for him. And we'll have a little bit of a dialogue, and then we'll let him go back to the floor on the Senate. He was just mentioning that he has to go back. And then after that, we'll put our panel, and we'll have an open dialogue after that, okay? Please, Senator, thank you.
First, it's a lot safer here than on the floor of the Senate, so maybe I'll spend the rest of the day. It really is a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be here at this facility. As you know, Johns Hopkins is homed in the state of Maryland, so Senator Van Hollen and I are honored to be the senators representing Johns Hopkins University. We love this building.
We have a good friend then in the Senate.
Absolutely. And I'm very proud of what Hopkins partners on foreign policy issues. They, in so many different ways. Obviously, this school here does incredible service and training so many people in good public policy that we need in this country. And one of our great challenges is Americans understanding history and civil engagement, et cetera. Well, you all are making that a commitment. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and say thank you. So let me just give you a little bit about my luck here. This is my second go round as the leading Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When President Obama was president, I became the ranking Democrat, the lead Democrat, when Senator Corker chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. My luck, it was just during the nuclear agreement discussions with Iran, which is extremely divisive in our nation and in Congress, and I had to step into that. Now, my second round, I'm chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I get a war in Ukraine, I get a Middle East explosion. So timing has not been the best for me, but it's a great honor to chair the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I want to put this in context, North Africa. Because North Africa is a critical region for U.S. national security interests. To put this in context, though, recognize that we have one of the greatest challenges of our time in Russia's invasion. It is the worst invasion of sovereignty we've seen since World War II. And we know Russia would not stop with Ukraine. And that's why we've made this such a priority to get the supplemental pass to help Ukraine, to keep the coalition going. But Russia is not the only area that we have concern, because we know who is supporting Russia's efforts. People's Republic of China is supporting Russia's efforts. They claim they're not, but they are. They've made significant goods available that have helped Russia's war effort. Iran is supporting Russia. Iran, which is the supporter of all the proxies that are causing the challenges in the Middle East, direct activities as well. But their proxies in Hamas attack in Gaza, on Israel, what's happening in the Red Sea with the Houthis, what's happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah, what's happening in Iraq and Syria with the militias, all can be traced to the support network through Iran. China is causing not only economic challenges that we all know that they want to control the rules of engagement on the economy, but they're also now looking more militaristic. And they're looking at what's happening in Ukraine to decide whether a military option against Taiwan is advisable or not. By the way, in the China Seas, we also see a much more militant China. All of these are connected. So where does North Africa come in? Well, North Africa is the route between the Middle East and the continent of Africa. We know that. It's a strategic area in which both PRC and Russia have shown tremendous interest. So I start by saying we got to pay more attention to North Africa. It's got to be a higher priority in our diplomacy. And I know we're engaged throughout the world. I just had a hearing today on the Pacific Islands. Important part, China's very active in the Pacific Islands. We got to do more in the Pacific Islands as well. But we can't ignore North Africa. And it presents unique challenges for us. We have unique challenges because they're facing serious challenges in North Africa, both on the economic and political front. On the economic front, we know that their economies are not working for their people, which when you don't have economies that are not working, when people are living below poverty, when people are desperate to get supplies, it leads to government instability. And we're seeing in North Africa a backsliding on democracy. We're seeing domestic instability, and it's leading to conflict. So we need to figure out a strategy that we can try to counter those trends that we see currently in North Africa. The U.S. goals need to be for a safe and humane treatment of migrants. There are a lot of migrants. Most of these migrants are coming through North Africa, and in many cases being mistreated in North Africa. You have those from sub-Saharan Africa trying to get into Italy, and the challenges are very, very severe. We've seen this on the ground. We got to have a strategy to help safety of and treatment of migrants. We need economic reform. Good governance is so important. We have too many corrupt leaders in North Africa. Too many of our systems are based on corruption. We need governance that respects the will of the people and provides for the will of the people. We've got to strengthen democratic institutions and respect for human rights in North Africa. My point is, yes, number one, I want the United States to be more active in North Africa, but I want our activities to be based in our values. And our values is to protect the migrants, to develop good governance, to deal with democratic institutions, and to protect human rights. So I could go through all the countries in North Africa, but I'll just make some general comments, and then I'll give you a few minutes for some friendly questions. It's been a tough day.
Well, you're in an academic institution with graduate students, so you never know.
Never know. But just a few things. In Tunisia, we see probably the most turbulent period since 2011 Jasmine Revolution. We see a government that's trying to take away the power of their legislature, trying to take away the power of their judiciary, imprisoning political opponents. That's not what we need to see in any country. And in North Africa, that needs to be a concern in Tunisia. At the same time, as a result of poor governance, 1/3 of the population lives below the poverty level. Migrants are at risk in their transit from sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to support civil societies. You know, one of our ways of countering this, yes, government can do a certain amount, but it is empowering and protecting the civil societies that operate that give us the greatest hope for types of changes that we need in these countries. You mentioned, one of you mentioned Libya to me on the way up. Yes, we need a confirmed ambassador in Libya. That's good news. We have now a confirmed ambassador in Haiti. We sort of embarrassed the Republicans to put up the ambassador, considering everything that's happening in Haiti today. We have a backlog of confirmed ambassadors, and it's difficult. In Libya, you have the East and West, you have a real opportunity to get all the sides together. It's starting to form some real hope. We know that we need the U.S. engagement because we know that outside troops, actually forces from Turkey and Russia, are making it much more difficult for us to deal with the solution in Libya. We need U.S. presence to really keep on track the negotiations taking place for a unity government. How do you do that if you don't have a confirmed ambassador? Really, that's our voice. And it says a lot about the priority we give a country if we don't at least have a confirmed ambassador. Now, we do have our special representative, our special rep, needs to play a major part in this. So there's some hope, but we've seen a hope before and we've seen it dashed. Let's take advantage of this. Let's get these foreign troops out of Libya. That's going to be very important. I spent a lot of time in Egypt, not literally, but worried about Egypt. Egypt is a huge partner. It is a country, of course, who normalized their relationship with Israel many years ago. It's playing a very, very key role in trying to resolve the challenges in the Middle East today with hostage negotiations, with passage of humanitarian assistance into Gaza, into negotiating what comes after the war as far as a pathway towards peace in the Middle East with two states living side by side in peace. Egypt's playing a critical role. So they live in a difficult neighborhood. Sometimes we forget. I think I live in a hostile neighborhood because Virginia's to my south, but they really do have a hostile environment in their neighborhood, in their communities. We should recognize that. There's a civil war going on in Sudan to their south, Libya's to their west, Gaza's to their east, and the Houthis are attacking the Red Sea. So we have to be mindful of their security needs. So here I am. I'm one of those individuals that will continue to press Egypt, and I will continue to press Egypt for human rights advancements. They imprison journalists when they shouldn't. Political opponents are in jail today, should be released. I've used my position as chairman of the committee. I can leverage certain foreign military sales to make sure we get progress made on human rights. I'm going to use every leverage I can to advance human rights on behalf of people. But I also have to be mindful of the security challenges that they face. We recognize that also in regards to the negotiations in regards to Gaza. They are very concerned that they could lose control at the Rafah gate, and we have to be mindful of that. But we have to spend more time in our relationship with Egypt, and I think we have a chance to move forward in some of those areas. I could go through a lot of the other countries, Morocco, Algeria. The best thing we do there is get the Western Sahara resolved. That's only been going on for a few years. How many years?
3 decades, 4 decades at least.
So that's a sore spot. The good news, it's not exploding right now. Bad news, it could explode again. So if we're going to have, we got to pay attention. We saw in the Karabakh region with Azerbaijan and Armenia, you might think these things will resolve themselves. They don't resolve themselves. So we have to be proactive in trying to resolve those issues. And quite frankly, it requires the United States engagement. We are the enablers. We're the country that can bring together. It's very interesting. Every country wants to do business with us. Every country. They may be covering their bets and doing things with China and things like that, but they want to do, we're the preferred partner. And we need to leverage that to advance the values that I mentioned: good governance, democratic institutions, respect for human rights, economic reforms, working with the IMF, working with those changes. And we do that, we can have a more prosperous North Africa, a more stable North Africa, and a North Africa that is in our national security interest, be a more stable region and partner for the United States. That is our objective. That's what we are trying to do. I am proud of President Biden's leadership and Secretary of State Blinken's leadership. They're engaging North Africa. They're engaging parts of the world that we have not given priority to. But if I ask you for one bit of help, the foreign ops budget is too small. We have to have a grassroots effort that America needs to be more engaged globally. It's hard when you have a pie that's not big enough to take care of our existing needs. And we know we need to do more in regions such as North Africa. We all need to fight for the budget priorities. And in some cases, that means making the case to the American people. I say that because I have in this room people who will have the opportunity to make that case to the American people. So thank you for your willingness to get involved in foreign policy, get involved in governance, getting involved on behalf of our country for a better America and a safer world. Thank you.
Thank you. You are very knowledgeable about the region. Please sit down. Well, I'll take the first question for you, and then we'll open it up for a few minutes until I get the sign from the staffers to let me know you're leaving. You've spoken on all the major issues facing the region, from the Sahara country, which has a Sahara issue, which has been the worst block of really any economic improvement across the region. I spent 20 years in the IMF and the World Bank, and every time that issue blocks pretty much everything we want to do, including some kind of integration in that part of the world, just will lift everybody. You've spoken about Libya and Egypt. Of course, we consider Egypt a part of North Africa for us here in this initiative. Now, let me start off by Libya for a number of reasons, because it is sort of the hottest issue now. And I think it's the one will impact the United States the most immediate, simply because of its proximity to NATO and to the European shores, and because of the presence of Russia, which is military. I mean, Russia never really gets involved in any positive way. It's always by military and creating all kinds of havoc. Let me ask you directly a very specific question. The general who has been waging war, importing the Russian Wagner group and the militias from Janjaweed in Sudan to Chad, is an American citizen. He spent 20 some years here. How is that possible that the United States is willing to tolerate that in the middle of this civil war?
I'll put him on the list of other American citizens I do not want to follow. You know who's at the top of that list. I won't mention his name. But anyway, it's hard to understand what motivates individuals. But our challenge is it's getting support from Russia and Turkey, which is not at all helpful.
Not Turkey, but Russia.
Russia, which is not, thank you for breaking that. So we have the Global Fragility Act, which is applicable to Libya, that was passed a few years ago, but the president has a 10-year plan. Libya is central to those efforts. So we are trying to develop the strategy as it relates to Libya moving forward, which would deal with the realities of the two political factions that are in the country. We think, in a way, what the general is doing is undermining the sovereignty of the country, which is making it difficult for us to have the type of stability going into negotiations. So yes, we are very much concerned about those activities, but we hope that the game plan, which is going to have resources connected to it and a strategy, will deal with the positive developments that we've seen in getting the stakeholders together to form a unity government that can move beyond the civil war that's been taking place.
The reason why I'm asking is because I'm very, very, even an expert on Libya, and I know the dynamics that's going on in that part of the world. And I know the damage and the spoiling effect that this general has been including. And what sort of made me, my jaw drops is when the United States deals with him as a legitimate, credible partner. I mean, and we have all kinds of visits with him, given that he's an American citizen. He has committed all kinds of war crimes that are in front of U.S. courts, by the way, federal courts. We did that also in Chad in the past. So, but that's why I'm curious to pick your brain on a lot of American diplomats who worked on Libya, including the former special envoy of the United States, former ambassador. They all have warned the State Department about dealing with him for years. But we still, still this administration is still continuing that.
The administration has a lot of tools.
Yeah.
They can use them or they don't have to use them. Congress gets frustrated sometimes. We give the administration, we want them to have flexibility and discretion, but we want our tools to work.
Yeah.
So just recently, the president used some tools that we developed, that I was responsible for its authorship, to go after certain U.S. actors in the West Bank. So we are prepared to use tools that we have available. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I would argue it is more an executive decision than a legislative decision. And, I'm kind of funny about this. I really do believe in two branches of government, all three branches of our government. I think that's a strength. So we're going to have, I hope, a markup in our committee very shortly on Iran, in which I would like to do everything I can to penalize Iran for its nefarious activities. But I believe in giving the executive branch the discretion they need to be strategic as to how they go about using those tools and when there needs to be carrots rather than sticks offered to make progress. That's what I think is the proper power. So Libya presents many issues, and I'm sure the use of a tool against the general would affect other decisions that are being made. I will raise that with the administration, but I don't have a good answer to tell you.
No, I understand. I mean, it is a prerogative of the administration. But ironically, at least a lawyer in Washington told me that actually the very fact that he's an American citizen serving in a military capacity in a civil war is in itself a violation of U.S. laws. I don't know if that's true or not.
I'm not sure that's true, because you could argue, how about the U.S. citizens that are in IDF? I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. So let me open the floor for questions for the senator, and then we'll release him back to the Senate.
Yes.
Hi, I am an employee at the International Institute on the North Africa team. In terms of development, I'm so happy you spoke of the GFA, which is where we look for funds to work on projects in Libya. My colleague works in Tunisia as well. And we've noticed quite a dwindling of funds for development projects, calls for proposals that focus on North Africa. Considering that that is such an important part of soft diplomacy and why Russia and China have popular footing based off, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative that has led to a lot of infrastructure in North Africa. Why is the US moving so slowly, I suppose, to get funds that aid in soft diplomacy, that open doors for many other negotiations, and that directly counter Russia and Chinese activities?
It's a great question, and we are trying to take some steps. Probably our largest single domestic program on that is DFC, the development financing. We are looking at changes in that law that would leverage by billions of dollars more funds that are available. Why are we looking at that? Because of China. We were just talking about the Pacific Islands today in our committee, where almost all the development programs in the Pacific Islands are Chinese. Why? Because they come in there when no one else will go in, because the investments are not really thought out well. They sell a bill of goods. They're cheap. They don't do it right. Then they have leverage over that country through debt diplomacy. So we need to be more engaged in a more aggressive way. One of our biases is that we don't like small programs. You know, the administrative costs of small programs can eat up the efficiencies of them. So we look for big programs. And guess what? A lot of the countries you're talking about, we need they're relatively small programs. So we have to remove that bias that we see. And we are acting to try to do that through cost by providing additional cost benefits for smaller projects so that they're not built into the cost of the project itself. So you're right, we're working with the World Bank. We have a lot of priorities going on. We have the underserved areas such as North Africa, but we also have the climate agenda that we have to deal with through development programs. So there's a lot of competing funds and there's not a lot of dollars available. But you're absolutely right. We can do a much more efficient job. I hope that the Congress is going to pass a development bill in this Congress. I also hope we're going to pass an economic bill to counter China's aggression economically in this Congress.
Please.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for being Congress Chairman. Just quickly question to follow up what she just mentioned. How do we get, my name is Yannick Ton, I'm from Rwanda, famous of Rwanda. How do we get more private sector, USA private sector into Africa? How do we, Congress and the leadership here helps them, the private sector, be able to go to Africa? And how do we create that atmosphere and that trade for them? Thank you.
Yeah, what we hear most about private sector engagement, they want stability. So they're worried about how stable is the country they're operating in. They have safety for their people concerns. So that's one precondition almost for a broad interest in international investment is stability. The other is risk factor to the investment. That's something we can try to mitigate through government participation, but there's also the risk factor in that regard. There's also the predictability. How confident are we that the long-term commitments that are made will be honored? So these are some of the issues, but the United States can be actively engaged to help you on all three. Because in many of these countries, we are engaged on security issues, that we are engaged on making sure that there is stability in the government and the contracts and take away some of the risk factors. So we got to be more aggressive. You know, quite frankly, Africa has not had the same priority as other parts of the world. So we have to up our game. So it's just, you know, we didn't have a lot of competition, but now we have a lot of competition. Now we're panicked. So we're trying to play catch up.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think Africa is going to dominate the next few decades.
I think you're right.
I think the United States will miss an incredible opportunity and get into trouble if it ignores it. You just reminded me that I haven't recognized few people from the various embassies, including the Algerian embassy and others.
Hello,
so, there is probably time for 2 more questions.
They got to be only students or?
No, of course.
Okay, I
Please.
have a question. It seems to me that the United States has been very opportunistic in the sense that he has left a lot of vacuums in the world. And then when somebody that is not US ally, then the panic comes and try to do something. And this is happening in Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, now Africa, and then countries, other power countries such as Russia and China now are filling that vacuum. Why do you not? I understand that the US cannot be policing all of the world, but in very strategic areas, like you mentioned in Africa, because it's so close to now to NATO countries, etc. So why the attitude of the US to come in always late? I don't know. I'm just being very blunt.
Late for an impetuous population. That's interesting. Interesting dichotomy here. I think it's because we really don't understand history, and we have not learned history, and we are naturally going to be more interested in our schools, in our healthcare, in our roads and bridges here in the United States. It's going to be the domestic issues and accountability that are going to dominate concerns for typical families. How am I paying my weekly budget for food? They're going to be the bread and butter issues that are going to entertain. And they don't think of the global issues. Most people don't know couldn't name the countries of North Africa. They probably could not name the countries of Europe in some cases. So, and we've been dominant with Europe in our history, as we know. They certainly don't know the countries of our own hemisphere. So it's, I think, a lack of knowledge. Secondly, the United States is built up to become a military superpower. So we invest a lot in our military, more than any other country, probably more than the whole world combined. We put our major financial attention to our Department of Defense. So our diplomacy and aid, USAID and State Department, gets a very small part of the federal budget. And it's a big world. And if you're trying to deal with where we haven't been before, and you have a budget that's not growing, that's already too small, you're going to have to cut something in order to do something. And where are you going to cut? You're going to cut humanitarian assistance in parts of the world. You're going to cut our services to migrants around the world. Are you going to, where are you going to draw the line? So I think it's a combination of the fact that Americans, first of all, think that a huge part of their budget is going international when it's not true. And secondly, they think that we need to spend more time on domestic issues. Now, as far as the parts of the world that we've been engaged in, I just think that was the natural bias of America in its early history, that we would spend more time with Europe. And after World War II, we spent a lot of time with Europe. We did spend some time in our hemisphere, but now we're seeing migrant issues. It's caused more attention to our own hemisphere. But Africa, Asia have never had the attention that we really need, and we really need to up our resources. It's not just financial resources, political resources in those regions.
Any other questions or?
Yes.
Please.
Good afternoon, Senator Matthew from HWPL. You mentioned that it's important that the American people engage, specifically with advocacy overseas. My question is, how is Congress currently working with different advocacy groups, specifically in Sub-Saharan Africa, and what are some steps or some things that we could do to be more engaged?
Right, and look, here's the good news. We have a lot of diaspora communities. We should be engaging them a lot more aggressively than we are today. We have great tools that are available, like AGOA, which can give us trade preferences to African countries. We need to build on that. In Maryland, I was responsible for building an African trade office so that we could have direct connections between Maryland businesses and businesses in Africa. We need more people-to-people exchanges between the continent of Africa and the United States. So all of that then builds greater support for investment and engagement in Africa. Now, the challenge with Africa, it's big. I mean, really big. Those of you who've been to Africa, you know it's really big. And it's very, very diverse. So it's not one size fits all, and that's for sure. So we really need to develop strategies to deal with the continent and recognize there are going to be totally different priorities in different parts of the continent.
Thank you very much, Senator. You seem to be needed. So,
Getting back to the floor. Thank you all very much.
he's a natural academic. I mean, he can. We should invite him to give a lecture here one time if you want.
Thanks for doing
And,
what you're doing.
I'm going to introduce Giordano from the UNDP, who's going to speak, and then we'll move on to the other speakers. I'm just going to see the senator out, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Giordano is a senior advisor at the UNDP for the Arab states. He is a governance specialist, and he's joining us from New York to give us their point of view. They are working now, engaged very seriously in a strategy for North Africa. The administrator of the UNDP for the Arab states is very focused on the region. So I'll give him a few minutes to speak, and then we'll move on to our other guests. Please, Giordano.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the invitation, opportunity to meet you all virtually. I'm calling from Jordan, so unfortunately, I'm not with you in person. So the discussion already offers rich food for thoughts, but as someone who spent a few years in the Arab states, I will share a few observations from a development practitioner perspective, whom I hope will be useful. I mean, Senator Cardin already stated clearly some development priorities for North Africa and the broader region, and we as UNDP share those. investments in governance, strengthening civil society, democratic reforms, protecting human rights. Indeed, the US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability very much has a lot of points of alignment with our own UNDP global crisis offer, but also more generally with the UN New Agenda for Peace, which calls for comprehensive approaches to peace, national capacities to be strengthened, and preventive diplomacy, etc. So one of the elements that has been featured in the discussion before, but I think is also central to the strategies is the focus on Libya, because it's a country across region, and we know the impact of destabilization on Libya, on Sahel and other places. So as UNDP, we are investing efforts also with the support of the US on local peace building and reconstruction. Aspects of livelihood, social cohesion, these are very, very important and increasingly important, especially in the southern Libya borderlands, where issues such as rising inflation and endemic corruption can further shake stability. So also we came out recently with a study on the prevention of violent extremism in the southern Libya borderlands. And this reminded us that peripheral communities remain susceptible to violent extremism. Hence the importance of local development, insecurity responses that shouldn't be at the expenses of source of livelihoods, especially where informal trade is a key feature. And also it's an area where local identity affiliation, tribes, ethnic groups catalyze marginalization and should be taken into account in programming. So in UNDP, we invest in many of these development areas in North Africa, which is a critical sub-region for us. And indeed, we also apply a regional lens into programming, because we face a number of transnational phenomena. We all know violent extremism, climate change, forced displacement cannot be addressed by a single state only. So the regional and sub-regional lens help cross-country analysis, cross-border programming, peer learning. So, I mean, I wanted to share, because I think it's important, without any presumption of lecturing the Johns Hopkins folks, but let me share a perspective on some of the issues that I think North Africa in particular is facing in terms of, I think, from a vital lens. I think about unsolved transition or disagreements on the re-engineering of a new social contract. The post-independent social contracts were largely grounded, as we know, on the acceptance of state control in exchange for services and social mobility. But population growth, advancement in education, urbanization have changed the equation, and higher expectation of a stronger middle class have not been met, and therefore have led to calls for radical changes. Now, some of these contentious components for a new social contract were put on the table during the Arab uprising and remain largely unaddressed. First, the political side. Countries face persisting tensions between a narrow interpretation of stability and a state-centric framework against a need and a call for greater legitimacy of the authority and desire for accountability and role in decision-making. The second tension is economic, and the senator also mentioned it, between a merit-based approach to distribution of resources versus approaches that still emphasize identity, kinship, patronage networks. And this latter has led to poor economic management, weakens the middle class required to drive growth, fuel an unstable business environment, and drive corruption. The third is about social values. Citizens are still negotiating a balance between traditional social values that emphasize group affiliation, informal mechanism, and some religious or based norms versus universal values that focus on the role of individual and gender equality. While all these tensions remain and are currently stuck, I would say, recently the economic discussion have superseded due to the inflation, macroeconomic hurdles, and challenges to address basic needs. This introduction just to say that I think we believe in UNDP that long-term investment in comprehensive reforms that address governance, rule of law, human rights, economic aspects are very much needed, but at the same time, we must invest in building the capacities to manage those transformations or transitions towards a new social contract peacefully. So this it also has an impact on the way we are looking as practitioners to development work. So besides thematic area, we are trying to change the way we work on the field and re-engineering our programming. First, we ground development responses to system thinking. So no more looking at conflict in a linear manner, root causes, intermediate factors, symptoms, but systematically and circularly. Therefore, we prioritize solutions that have a greater impact in the system. Second, organize the working portfolio, transitioning from silos, governance, economic development, environment, etc., into integrated responses. So we have a regional portfolio on the social contract, and also countries such as Tunisia has now revised this whole development programming around the portfolio. So this enables also learning and adaptation more fast. Another aspect is engagement with regional institutions. It's very important. We have a clear entry point with the League of Arab States, which this is very important for North Africa in particular, on youth, peace, and security, because the League of Arab States just finalized its first regional strategy. We and other UN agencies and partners have supported from the onset. So now is the time to roll out the action plans regionally and in member states. So it's very important that we look at transformative aspects. The second one, where we engage with all regional institutions, African Union, League of Arab States, especially the Arab Council, Arab Interior Ministry Council, but also IGAD in the Horn, is on prevention of violent extremism. Because we have the evidence, we have the facts that a PVE lens into development programming works. So it's an area very important for investment. And I would like to conclude with some ideas or suggestions or food for thoughts looking forward in a fast-changing and complex environment. So I think there are 5 elements that remain critical. First, continue investing in multilateralism, and the US has been a key actor leading the way. Investing in multilateralism means investing in dialogue in all its forms. Second, we shall advocate and adopt a narrative that recognizes that without development and peace investments complementing humanitarian responses, recovery may be unsustainable. This requires a serious focus on prevention. $1 spent in prevention equals $16 in savings from the cost of recovery and reconstruction. Today, only a very small portion of ODA goes to prevention, and the international community has been largely conservative on that. Third, efforts in early warning and conflict sensitivity. Tools that look at tension monitoring system, risk analysis, political economy analysis, and adaptive programming make us less blind to the context as practitioners. This means less risk to do harm and greater impact. Fourth, regionally, as UNDP, we are promoting the insider mediation agenda, and for practical reasons. Track 1 diplomacy must be pursued, but has become increasingly ineffective in the current reality, and peace agreements we have seen in many places, including Sudan, have often failed, followed by conflict relapses. Insider mediation means building very local capacities for mediating and preventing conflict and infrastructure for peace, empowering local communities to independently prevent and resolve conflict. So we build a network in different countries and a regional one as an empowerment space and a safe space for mediators. The last one, which also the Senator mentioned, I think we need to shift the narrative on human mobility. We shall explore new options and solutions for a multidimensional strategy. This is critical for North Africa, which is a land of destination, transit, and departure of migrants. This means strengthening governance around human mobility, potential of circular migration, diaspora potentials, enhance social cohesion across transit routes, and also increase the socioeconomic resilience and livelihood of the people in transit and the host communities. Thank you very much. Over to you. I hope I didn't speak too long.
Thank you very, very much, Giordano. The UNDP Office of Arab States is a very important and strategic partner for us, especially on North Africa. So we will be doing more and more events with them in the coming months. Evans represents the Congressman Jim Baird. He's a Republican, so you can blame the other side as well of the House. The congressman was scheduled to join us. Unfortunately, his schedule got, I think, changed. So he sent us his wonderful assistant. Please, Evans, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think you can tell that I'm not the senior director of anything, and I'm not the
But
expert.
you're the most important. In my experience, the assistants are the ones who are feeding the information.
Well, I'm very flattered, but I disagree. But I just want to take a moment to thank you all for allowing me to be here. Like you said, the congressman wishes he could be here, but unfortunately could not make it. And I'm truly privileged to be able to take some time and speak with you all. He did prepare some remarks, so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to pass those along to you all. So I just want to highlight again how much of a privilege it is to speak in company of such distinguished guests. Senator Cardin is the epitome of a public servant, and he's probably forgotten more about foreign policy than I'll ever be able to learn. So I'm very grateful to be here. I'd also like to take a moment to thank both Johns Hopkins and HWPL for organizing this roundtable on a critical discussion like North Africa. My remarks today are on behalf of the Congressman, and given the expertise and the comments by the previous speakers, I'll keep it pretty brief for y'all. President Dwight Eisenhower remarked that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. I have an appreciation for the president's plan, and I don't think I've met anyone opposed to preventing conflict and promoting stability. The key, though, to whether or not this will be successful is to be determined by thoughtful political leaders, excuse me, like Senator Cardin, dedicated professionals like we've heard before, advocates like those at HWPL, educational institutions like Johns Hopkins, and perhaps most importantly, the people of North Africa themselves. It goes without saying that the world is facing a magnitude of ongoing challenges, but with some historical perspective, we know that what we have gone through worse. And with some proper planning, with an emphasis on partnership and our allies, we know we can have brighter days in the future. As a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Congressman Baird is acutely aware of the challenges North Africa faces. While the administration's approach to prevent conflict and promote stability is a step in the right direction, the Congressman believes that more can be done in achieving these goals. Now, the Congressman's background is in agriculture, and he's a farmer, and that is often the dynamic that helps shape his view. Food is a foundational need, and anywhere you find a scarcity of it, you also find disruption, instability, and conflict. Because of this, he's a big supporter of efforts to provide food security relief, and we see many hotspots in North Africa where there is limited supply. Even better, though, is the ability to move from food assistance to helping farmers develop the capacity to feed more and more of their surrounding populations. The Congressman also finds that furthering election and governance support is vital to ensuring stability in the North African region. The Congressman was pleased to hear that key Libyan leaders have agreed to the necessity of forming a unified government to supervise elections. With this being a first major step toward election in years, the Congressman believes that USAID and the State Department should provide the necessary resources to ensure fair and free elections are conducted when that unified government is formed. In forming a unified government, Libya can not only supervise the electoral process, but provide essential government services to its citizens. This will be true across the board where government is responsive and to the needs of its citizens and has peaceful transitions of power. As a veteran of the US Army, Congressman Baird also understands the need for peace and stability in Northern Africa. Armed aggression will only prolong the violence and instability experienced within the region. To mitigate this, the Congressman strongly believes we must turn away from all armed conflict in the region and instead turn to diplomatic channels to be a catalyst for positive change. This is evident in the before-mentioned agreement between Libyan government leaders through a conference held by the Arab League. Congressman Baird believes that regional organizations like the African Union and the Arab League are essential to fostering peace and stability within the region. These institutions provide channels of communication that otherwise would not be available and allow for multilateral peace-building cooperation. The Congressman encourages the Arab League and African Union to continue their meaningful work in stabilizing the region. To address the root causes of conflict in North Africa, the Congressman believes that the United States should continue to support our North African friends by utilizing the numerous resources that our colleagues at the State Department and USAID provide. The United States can assist in critical issues like socioeconomic inequality, political grievance, and food security by prioritizing programs that are most crucial to basic human need. With that, I thank you again for being here today, and I encourage you to continue your advocacy in this space, and the Congressman thanks you for your time for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
In the event that I can't answer any questions, I got a bunch of business cards and we can touch base.
That's great. I'm gonna borrow that from you.
Yeah.
We have now our partner who actually helped us organize this and who has devoted her life, I think, in her career in trying to promote peace around the world, not just in any specific way. We have Reagan, who is the director of the HWPL. I have to read it. I'm sorry. You know, an organization that is global in reach and that is advocates for peace around the world. So please, Reagan, I'll give you the floor, and then after that, we will have about 20 minutes or so to have questions for our panel. And please, by the way, I forgot. Lana told me you can grab your lunch as we speak if you're hungry already. Please.
Yeah, please, no passing out. But no, thank you so much. And, you know, similar to Evan, we just wanted to thank our partner, Johns Hopkins, for even doing this event with us for our organization. So it stands for Heavenly Culture, World Peace, and Restoration of Light. And I definitely can't take credit for dedicating my life to peace, maybe the past 5 years, but definitely the chairman of our organization. He's someone who has traveled the world 31 times to speak with heads of state, with ministers, with politicians, with universities, to ensure that everyone can be committed to this work of peace. And so what we find very helpful and thankful to, you know, Congressman Baird and his team, and also the senator who was here earlier, we're very grateful for this bipartisan work for peace, especially within North Africa, because our organization really, we need the partnership of, you know, people like the United States of America to go in and to be able to stabilize in order for us as a civil society organization to even do the work of peace that's necessary. But what we found, even looking at the 10-year plan and other mechanisms that are now in place to achieve stability in the region, there has to be an actual clear vision of what peace actually is. And so what our goal and what we're trying to do as an organization is world peace and the cessation of war. But the way that we outline that is through the Declaration of Peace and Cessation of War, which is 10 articles and 38 clauses that really breaks down UN international law and allows it to be very practical for nations and for regions. And so, you know, our approach to this is working with the different representatives, senators, universities, but really being able to go into these regions, but actually have clarity and understanding and unity on what peace is actually going to look like moving forward. And so one of those articles is Article 10, which is talking about spreading a culture of peace. But truthfully, this can't, we're not, we're not childish to think that this can just happen. We go and try to do peace work on the ground without there actually being stability and democracy. And so this is really important to us to have these sort of partnerships and these discussions to be able to achieve that, so that civil society organizations like ourselves can then be supported and actually carry out the real work of peace building and peacemaking, from education to legislation and to mediation within different ethnic groups and religious groups. And so that's really what our organization is founded upon. And I guess I'll end with a story of what's possible, which is our organization several years ago went into Mindanao and was able to facilitate a peace treaty between the Catholic group and the Muslim group that had been having a civil conflict for about 40 years. That, you know, no UN or government organization or anyone was able to come in as that third party, non-biased voice to settle that conflict. But that's the power of working with NGOs and third parties. And so we really believe that these partnerships with our government, especially with the US government, is really critical in order for NGOs like HWPL to be able to do the work that we're able to do. So
We need
we're
to
really-
send you around the world to solve problems.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal.
You're more effective than governments, I guess, you know.
But, you know, we don't say it, but.
Okay, we have few minutes for questions for our panel. You had an opportunity to ask the senator, but let's open it to the floor, please, ma'am.
Yes, hi, my name is Tima and I'm a student here. I had a question, I think, to Giordano. To what extent do you think peace building in places like the Arab world is possible while maintaining the values? I mean, I guess you talked about the social contract. To what extent the social contract maintain the values that maintains the social fabric of the society and is very essential for peace, obviously. And to what extent is it possible without enforcing neoliberal values?
Can you hear her question, okay? Giordano, did you hear the question, okay?
Yes, do you want me to respond directly or want to take more questions for the panel?
Well, please, yeah, whoever, I mean, it wasn't directed at any specific person.
To him, actually, yes.
Yeah, it was-
Giordano.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Oh, not to me, to him.
Yeah.
Please, she was pointing.
Please. I think it's a very good question. And the negotiation of a social contract is not an easy process and requires capacities to actually negotiate. That's why elements such as insider mediation are important, because build those capacities from the local level to the national level. So these are long-term processes. And we see in many democratic countries how negotiating specific aspects of a constitution are very difficult processes. Let's, put this in a perspective of countries which are just, which have democratic deficit and very low trust in governance. This is even more complicated. So from one side is building the capacities for peace and for negotiation and mediation. And also it's a question of introducing tools. In this region, powers often is in the hands of, let's say, senior generation, and youth are left behind. So intergenerational dialogue is one of those tools and should be, in my views, mainstreamed in development programming in the region and also beyond the region, because it's quite effective. So, of course, there are questions that are very crucial and probably will take much longer time to negotiate, but at least a minimum understanding among the parties of aspects of the economy, open the economy a little bit, make sure that it does not only serve certain circles. It's in the interest of everyone, because at stake, if these issues are not addressed, there is stability. And what we see now is actually a negative peace, meaning that there is, when there is absence of conflict, is negative peace. When there is enjoyment of rights and possibility to see ourselves into the future, that's the positive peace that should happen and should flourish.
Thank you. Either one of you wants to add something here to what Giordano said? Are you?
You can go. No, it's okay. It was for him.
Okay. The price of having lunch is you have to ask questions, especially for the. So please, any of you has any questions to ask? No?
Well, you as an expert, what is your opinion with regard to the overall picture of what's going on in Africa versus the current entrance of the United States trying to help and the other countries that are already there? So how do you see that conflict in a more, let's say, general way in how it affects the entire, not just the region, but the entire world?
Well, I'm gonna use his line. I'm gonna give you some cards. No, but do you guys mind if I just share my thoughts on this? I was born in North Africa, so this part of the world is my home, right? Even though I've been here for 40-some odd years, and I tend to look at the region as a whole rather than specific conflicts, right? And I think like the senator said, the lack of understanding of geography and history, that politics is geography and history, contributes a great deal to all of the mistakes that the the international community as a whole and the United States as the leader of that community commits, which actually tends to make things far worse. Libya is a great example. I think where I was born and where to some extent I'm involved in the politics of that party. And its links to Africa, to conflicts in Sudan, in Chad, Niger, its impact on Egypt, and its impact on Europe. Because, from my hometown to Rome, it's 1 hour flight. So it's, that's a lake, not really a sea that separates us. And if you think of the Sahara as another sea that is, has the African Sahel countries, we call them. So you're dealing with a country, first of all, that is massive. I mean, most people don't realize the size of Libya. It's equivalent of most of Western Europe. The population is only 8 million. And the conflict, there is a misunderstanding on the conflict. I'll tell you something you can tell the Congressman. Sure. This so-called agreement to form a government is a non-starter. It's a complete waste of time. It is a public relations campaign. It will not happen. And if it happens, it will happen in such a way that it will distort any possible solution for them. We tend to, as US government, tend to see things, or US as black and white. We like these simple good guys, bad guys. In that all of a sudden we got them, to kiss each other and make up. And the civil war was stopped. It's a very simplistic view. And, as a future specialist in international relations, if you don't take the time to actually understand the social structure in this society, their history, and the geography they grew up with, you are missing 95% of the picture. And therefore, I would advise that you talk to a number of people on Libya experts. This town is full of them. And others, I'll be happy to facilitate anything you need. To understand that this Libya, the situation in Libya as is today, is extremely welcomed by all parties. Nobody has an incentive to solve that problem, including the United States. Because what's the future, right? You have these sort of warlords, literally criminal organizations. You can't even call them politicians. Each one of them, and I mean that like basically mafias, because there's a difference between mafias and political parties. Mafias tend to want their own benefit. They want to make money and they want to control their territory. They're not interested in the welfare of anyone. That's the difference between them and between political or warring who tend to have a little bit of a larger political view. Libya today is controlled by mafias, literally mafias, civilian mafias and military mafias. If I tell you the number of mafias, you'll be shocked. You have military mafias like the warlords, especially in the east part of Libya, which the United States tends to think that he's going to solve the problem. Absolutely none. It's not even a part of his thinking. If anybody really bothers to listen and watch, you have militias on the other side of the country. They're all fighting, by the way, for oil, because there's nothing else in Libya except desert and oil. And whoever controls the oil controls everything else. There's billions of dollars come out of that. Then you have even criminal mafias who sell drugs, who help the migrants from Africa. Not help them, actually use them, abuse them. Abuse their need to get into Europe because they're fleeing civil wars, poverty, hunger, and so on. You have mafias that are selling weapons. You have mafias that are in specialists in stealing money. So if you walk into the Ministry of Health, in fact, a few days ago, I was with the former Minister of Health. He was telling me how the bureaucracy is controlled by these mafias to actually suck the money out of it. You have these civilian, so it's a spaghetti basically, right? You can't really separate these strands in an easy way. Now that does not mean there is no solution, and that does not mean that the United States government cannot help. Unfortunately, for the past few years that I watched it, and I've met and know all of the US ambassadors who served there, people here in the State Department, even the White House. They have good intentions, but they somehow don't understand the dynamics, and they have contributed enormously to the problem. Libya was the easiest problem to solve in 2012. Very easy. But because of the neglect, because of allowing other countries to take advantage of this, everyone wants money. And by the way, these mafias are not independent mafias. These are mafias supported and financed by foreign governments, jockeying for their positions. So my advice is for any one of you professionals thinking of a conflict, not just Libya, but a major conflict, including, for example, the conflict between Algeria and Morocco, or the conflict in Sudan, or the dynamics going on in Egypt. The incredible abuse of human rights, which the United States is willing to just forget about. We hear our government talking about democracy, human rights, and so on. If you watch the United States government, you realize that's the least concern of US government. Absolutely bottom of the barrel. So my issue is that if you want to solve these problems or think about them and understand them, you really need to take the time to actually understand the dynamics involved. And I'm hoping the UNDP and its new strategy for the region, which is a holistic strategy, not a fix and choose, will contribute a great deal, both intellectually and actually in its programs, to at least inform governments, inform the United States government, for example, about this. I think the intentions are good. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think anybody is sitting there thinking that, oh, how do I screw up here? But if you follow the history of that region, in Afghanistan, for example, or Iraq, you see even the good intentions of trying to do something end up in a major catastrophic results that span the world. They don't just get confined to that region, but imagine this massive piece of land, if it just completely implodes, the impact around it. I mean, Libya is not important if it's going well, but it's like Afghanistan. Nobody paid attention to Afghanistan before 9/11, but then when it imploded, look at the impact it had around the globe. And I will warn everybody, including, and I say this on a regular basis to everybody that I know in the US government, pay attention, ask around. There are a lot of expertise. I would suggest to you, honestly, as an assistant to add value to the congressman, bring in a number of not only the think tankers, but the former officials of the United States government who served there. Stephanie Williams, you have Jonathan Weiner, you have Ben Fishman, Deborah Jones. They're all around. They all spent a lot of time on that country and still do. They all learned from their mistakes. They all got burned. Especially from these guys who are meeting to supposedly hash out a peaceful plan. I would suggest that Congressman, if he's serious about this, he needs to spend a few minutes with each one of them and get the conclusion of what they have. This is another thing the US government never does. They never ask former officials who went to these countries. They went there naive. They went there thinking that everything is black and white. But then they get abused, they get tricked, they see the ugliness, who are these characters that the United States thinks they're going to solve the problem. They come out very, very aware of the situation. And yet, however, the person who comes after that never bothers to talk to them. So the experience gets cut off, and we are repeating the same cycle. And I've seen that personally on Libya over the last 10 years. Anyway, sorry I took too long. I'm, an academic never stops talking. Please, anybody, please.
Ariana Garvin with HWPL. I have been following a bit of the work that HWPL has been doing as it goes for bringing groups together as a way to go about peace, and even what you just shared about the importance of knowing the dynamics of a place, and even getting on the ground and hearing from the perspectives of the people there. I've been able to see even listening to religious leaders, which is, of course, like with foreign policy, if you're talking about foreign affairs, it's kind of hard to escape beyond the idea of religion amongst these groups, because it is a pretty big part of their culture. But just curious about what is the place that these religious leaders or people, spiritual leaders in these groups can play, as they are the ones who are even caring for the hearts of people who are, they're here in the United States or even abroad, and they're dealing with these experiences and trying to grapple with things that are happening from a political sector that are now affecting them as well on the ground. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on those things.
Megan?
Oh, well, I mean, we are HWPL, but so we have a lot of thoughts on those things. But would love to hear, what you guys, the infrastructure as far as the role to facilitate that. But yeah, as HWPL, we find it really important not to reinvent the wheel, and to really make strategic partners, and to be very careful who we partner with as well. We try to be, because our focus is peace mediation, we try to be very careful on who we partner with, who we work with. And we have several trips planned this year, not to North Africa as of yet, but to other African countries, to your point, to really understand what's happening on the ground, who the key players are. Because sometimes, when you're working at such a high level, you don't realize what's actually happening with all the different actors on the ground. Something we learned from the conflicts happening, the war between Russia and Ukraine, is when we went to Ukraine, we were one of the first people from the United States that actually came and talked to all the different mayors, to all the different governors, to all the different ministries in Ukraine. Because, of course, the US is very focused on, corresponding with the president himself and things like that. But as a civil society organization, we're very, where we kind of come in is build all these relationships with all the different actors on the ground. And so the same thing now we're doing in Africa and conflict zones as well. So we find it very important so that we can work together to, once it's stabilized enough, to actually promote and do the work of peace.
Evan, any thoughts? The question of religious leaders and their possible contributions in certain parts of the world where they have a significant importance, far more than
Sure.
we have here.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, at any instance that we can to support different religious leaders, I think is an important thing to do. But I think that question deserves a well-informed answer. So if you want to come, I'd rather defer.
He's going to give you his cards.
Yeah, I'm going to hand out some business cards.
I love that.
Yeah.
Giordano, any thoughts? Does the UNDP work with all kinds of different religious groups or religious leaders within its mandate?
We do work with religious leaders. They are, a key stakeholder. And just to make an example, in Somalia, we supported a network of 300 religious leaders, and we build their capacities to actually mediate in communities and also address issues of violent extremism in an area where Al-Shabaab was particularly active. And they were able to support the demobilization and reintegration of dozens of former combatants. So they play a role, very important. They spread messages of tolerance across society, and they built a group among themselves of let's say, a safe space among religious leaders. So they are a key interlocutor in communities because they actually have the pulse of the community, they have influence of the community, and they bring positive messages. So definitely.
I'll add one experience of mine in the World Bank. The World Bank decided at one point to also do that, although the World Bank is a non-political, aligned institutions of the UN. But at one point, they established an office liaison between the projects of the World Bank and the various religious communities. Now, that's not significant everywhere, but in Africa, in the Middle East, of all the talking about Christian mission, Christian priests and churches, Muslim mosques, they tend to have a far more impact on their local communities, right? So the idea was, how do you inform them in such a way that that message can be passed to the local community in some way, that with the aim to basically on development, prosperity, things like that, not political at all, of course, it's just peace building, trying to demobilize some of the militias, local militias, because they have a little bit more of an authority. Like here in the United States, I mean, there are neighborhoods in which the church is a central significance, and it can actually make a huge difference. In some places it's not so much. So I think we've done. Oh, sorry. Okay, very quick question.
For Giordano, actually. So as you have worked with over 300 religious leaders, have you had the chance to bring 300 plus business leaders together?
Business leaders, you said, correct?
Business leaders, yes.
Well, yes, we do work with the business sector, but it's mainly my colleagues from the inclusive growth team, so I'm not really an expert on that. But there is an aspect that intersects with my area of work, which is governance and peace building. Indeed, there is a normative framework, the business human rights, which was unanimously approved by Human Rights Council a few years back, that really focus on involving business, making sure that business are not, do not breach human rights, and at the same time support businesses in a play level field to be competitive if they also uphold human rights. So from different perspective also, for example, here in this region, we have the problem of kafala in the Gulf countries, but more in general. So we have started now to work in North Africa on this agenda on business human rights, working with human rights institutions, civil society, and with the businesses to make sure that they abide with these principles. It's a sort of an evolution of what was the compact before. We have, in Tunisia, we have a program on that and focusing with the fishing sector. And Tunisia is the first country in the region that actually developed a national action plan on business human rights. In Morocco, we are at the early stages and we are exploring entry points. But it's an agenda really that try to speak the language of human rights and to a target group that is not the usual one for governance and peace building practitioners.
Well, you can gather them with a big pile of money right in the middle of the table.
It's already there. It's just a matter of bringing them together.
I agree. And the idea is within the context, you show them that it's good for business. Contributing to peace, contributing to human rights is always good for business. And smart businessmen always tend to move towards areas of stability rather than areas of chaos. At least legitimate businesses. Mafias have a different goals. Thank you all very, very much. We have a few minutes for you to grab lunch. And I really appreciate it. I hope it was worth your time. And we'll try to do more.
Thank you very much.
See you next time you are in DC. And thank you both very, very much.
Thank you, Giordano.
And by the way, grab his business card.
Right. I got plenty.